Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Deborah Nelson, and this is Santa Rosa Week TV. Jerry's on vacation this week, but we are joined tonight by Dr. Tony Apap. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And Dr. Apap is a professor emeritus at UWF. He was a professor of finance for how many years?
20.
20 years,
Yeah.
okay. And you're a doctor of business administration. And tonight we're going to talk about Social Security. Social Security sort of resurfaces and then it disappears and it resurfaces again. Let me just set this up because this is something I'm aware of with Social Security. We heard when President Bush was in office, President George W. Bush, he had this sort of scheme for privatizing Social Security, and there was a big outcry against it. There was a backlash, and it disappeared for a little while. And now we've seen the resurfacing of these sort of, I'll call them attacks against Social Security. President Obama has set up a national commission on fiscal responsibility and reform, and they're currently meeting in Washington. This is one of the things that they're expected to take up is the issue of Social Security. We keep hearing this argument that Social Security is almost bankrupt. It's not going to survive. It's in dire straits. We have to do something. Of course, the something that always ends up being suggested is we have to cut benefits. We have to privatize. We have to somehow get rid of this quote-unquote entitlement. We'll talk about the entitlement side of it in a few minutes. I pulled some information from the Congressional Budget Office. And this is what they have to say, and this is what people, I think, are not aware of. Social Security actually is currently running a surplus.
Correct.
They take in every year more money in taxes, in payroll taxes and other revenues than they have to pay out.
Yes.
And that is actually expected to continue to happen until, what I have here is about 2019.
Well, most of the reports say 2016, but
Okay.
those are all inaccurate. I can cover that.
Okay. But they're expected to be running a surplus for several more years.
Yes, they will be.
And at that point, they're going to have to dip into this Social Security Trust Fund.
Right.
And this is something that was set up by Ronald Reagan. What happened was basically he made a bunch of tax cuts, and some of us think, tax cuts for the rich. And then he, at the same time, increased the FICA taxes on payroll. And that money was supposed to go into a trust fund where it was going to be saved up because they knew, well, we don't need it now, but when baby boomers start to retire, we're going to need all this extra money for Social Security. So there's a Social Security Trust Fund now that my numbers say have about $2.5 trillion.
Yes, that's
2.5
correct.
trillion in the Social Security Trust Fund. And what's going on now is around 2019, when we stop running the surpluses, they'll have to start dipping into that trust fund.
Okay, can we digress for a minute?
We can digress. Let's digress.
Okay. That's what got me interested in doing some research on Social Security, was this idea that it's going to start running a deficit imminently almost. And
Well, is it running a deficit, or is it now they have to dip into the savings that they've been saving since the 80s?
No. That's well, eventually they will have to do that. But right now, the way everything has been going, without any changes of any sort, the annual cash flows will go into a negative situation in 2024.
Okay.
In other words, all this is really not accurate, and it all stems from, I have to look at the public law. Public Law 101-58, Title 8 in 1990, which states in part, the Social Security Trust Fund is exempted from being counted as receipts, deficits, or surpluses for the purpose of budgeting in the federal government. And what this means is that the interest that's being earned on these bonds that we have can't be counted as an income when they do budgeting.
Okay.
So if you put that money back in there, instead of becoming a negative cash flow thing in 2016, 17, whatever the numbers you hear, it's actually 2024.
Okay.
Okay? Just so we know that those numbers that you read are published by the government because they're required to do that. They cannot use the interest. For instance, this interest is not a minimal number. In 2005, it was $151 billion in interest on that trust fund. That's not peanuts, okay?
Now this is the government paying back with interest what they have taken from the trust fund to spend on other things.
Well, that's another misnomer. People think there's nothing there. You see, the trust fund can't just put the money in a rat hole somewhere. They have to invest it. They chose to invest it in U.S. government bonds, which is a smart thing to do. It's the most safe security in the entire universe.
Right.
And they earn an average rate of interest each year on that. So, but these bonds are not traded. These are special bonds. It's kind of an interagency bond sort of a thing. So every time they get a surplus, then they go ahead and put it in the trust fund, and then the government borrows it back. And so what you have in the trust fund is a bunch of bonds. Now, if you invested in anything else, in stock, you wouldn't have a company in your backyard. You would have a piece of paper that says that you own a piece of a company. Or if you invested in a corporate bond, you would have a piece of paper that said this represents a debt. It's the same thing. So I think that for some people, for some reason, the government and other people want to scare the average citizen into thinking this thing is going to go belly up. It is not.
Right.
Because in 2024, if they don't change anything, then they will start dipping into the $2 trillion trust fund. Not the entire amount, only the deficit amount they have that particular year.
Right. To make up the difference between the larger payouts, because there's more baby boomers retiring,
Right.
which is the reason that they created the trust fund to begin with.
Yeah, the baby boomers started retiring in 2008, the first ones. So
Right.
it's already with us, 80 million of them.
Now, according to what I pulled off the Congressional Budget Office, they predict the trust funds will become exhausted in 2052. So they've got that money sitting there, and that's not going to be depleted until 2052.
Yeah, and that's not correct either.
Okay.
Same reason.
Okay.
Because they don't count the interest they're getting. I mean, you can't discount $151 billion.
Right.
But they are.
So it's actually still continuing, just like
Yeah.
a mutual fund would. It's still
Absolutely.
continuing to grow and grow.
Absolutely. Yes.
So basically, I mean, are they going to run out of money? I mean, that's what.
Not
they're-
anytime soon. And you know, we have all this time to make some substantive changes to Social Security where it will never run out of money.
Right. Right. Could you say it pays for itself?
Well, it's been paying for
Yeah.
itself all along.
And then
it
some.
has surpluses, and that's where
Right.
the 2 trillion
And then
came
some.
from.
But yet we hear it called an entitlement.
Well, I think we've had a conversation on
Yeah.
that before. I think it's really an insurance policy because you don't collect unless you pay into it.
Right.
And we've all paid into it. Myself, I've been paying into it since 1953. I don't consider what I get now an entitlement.
Right.
I'm getting paid back for all that money that I put in all those 57 years.
See, the Congressional Budget Office will try to argue that the interest they're paying back is the government paying itself. And of course, they leave out of that equation the fact that the original principal came out of our paychecks.
Mm-hmm.
They're ignoring that fact. And that's what they're taking, and that's being used in this argument to say, well, it's just shuffling money from one agency to the other, but there's still a big deficit, and we have to plug it somehow, and let's take the money out of Social Security and use that.
Well, right now, the government they come out and say that Social Security is the largest entitlement, counting 23% of the federal budget. It pays for itself.
Right.
So for some reason they're trying to scare everyone, or I don't know. But that's not true. I mean, it's really a separate entity that has its own trust fund, and it's in fine shape.
Yeah.
I mean, the baby boomer thing notwithstanding, this would go on indefinitely, but that is coming up. But there are ways, and you touched on one of them, about privatizing, and I could do a separate paper, and I'm going to on that.
You've written a paper on
Yes.
on saving Social Security.
Well, I just thought it was something I've always wanted to do, and this is the sort of thing that most college professors don't do when they're doing their academic research, and so I just kind of started collecting all this information, and now that I have this time, I'd like to try and educate the public as much as I'm able to do.